Okay. I think, guys, we can get started. Hi again. Good afternoon to everyone. So today's, guys, we are taking a knowledge session on the draft master direction on which came last year, somewhere in September, right? Which was on the information technology governance, risk control, and assurance practice. So as you know, the typical RBI has a process that for any master direction or the circular to come for the applicability. Before that, normally we have seen that the draft comes, right? And within the 6 to 8 months, 9 months, the master circular comes, right? Two weeks back, we have taken a session on the outsourcing of technology services, right? That's where similarly there was a draft earlier, and then the circular comes, right? So today again we are going to talk about that. What is this direction about? What are the things that you need to take care of it? What kind of the impacts you will have, especially on the regulated entities, right? So let's get started. And as a normal process, guys, you can raise your hand if you have any questions. We'll keep on taking the questions as we proceed. Or if you have a question, you can put up the question answer session. So that will do that. And during the mid of the session, again, you will have that the feedback form from the team, and we'll request you to share the feedback form. Okay, so let's get started. So before, guys, we go into the digital fifth, just quick introduction from my side. So myself, Shashank, Shekhar. Now I've been now working heavily into digital banking, but by career, if you can summarize that, I've been a governance and the compliance professional all my life, right? So I started my career with L&D Infotech, and then moved on to do the work with Wipro Consulting, and where primarily I was responsible for helping the organizations, especially in the BFSI, onto the cyber security, IT governance, regulatory compliance, and the various information security and cyber security framework from ISO 27000 to the BCP and everything's, right? So that's where there. And then move on to join the DCB Bank, where I was responsible for the IT governance function. So and then primarily taking care of all the regulatory compliance with respect to technologies. And many of you will remember, because that's a correlation with this circular that we are going to talk about it. Like 2011 in April, RBI came with a master guidelines on the IT governance, information security, technology management, which primarily known as the Gopal Krishnan Committee report. Many of you might have seen that, right? It was a bulky 174-page document. And one of my first assignment in the DCB Bank when came, it's just landed on the table, and then we have to make sure that we get compliant to that 174-page document. What RBI has done that they try to condense that entire the circular, the critical controls requirement, which was there across all the domains. They summarize in this current master directions, which is in the draft version that we have in front of you, which we're going to talk about it. So that's primarily is a genesis of it, and we'll talk about what it contains. So, and then subsequently in the DCB Bank, I moved on to start managing the IT infrastructure, and then digital banking, where that I primarily responsible to manage that entire mobile banking, internet banking platforms, and also setting up the open banking. And 2017, when Samir started this firm, the Digital Fifth, who was the earlier CTO of the DCB Bank and coming with a very experience in the banking, the digital, he started his film, the Digital Fifth, and then I joined him into that same space, right? Okay, so let's just about the Digital Fifth. So we are in the 6 years into now. We are in the digital and fintech consulting startup. We work primarily the BFSI industry into the digital space. And when we talk about the digital across the landscape, from the digital strategy journeys to the technology management, technology governance, compliance, every dimensions that we work on it. Primarily what we do, so 4 service line that we primarily cater to. The consulting is the key one, where that we work with the banks, NBFCs, the fintechs who are there into providing the consulting services in that same space of the digital. We do lots of work in the partnership, because many of the fintechs or the banks, when they need enough partnership, that will primarily help them to bridge the gap between these two parties. We also assist various organizations into the various recruitment for the senior positions across digital space and the technologies. And we do lots of the training in the B2B space. These are just a snapshot of our customers we have been working with in the last 6 years. This is just a bit on the market. You guys can reach out on the LinkedIn. You can get yourself registered to our website for our newsletters. Every week we can provide the very deep content on the newsletters. So just quick snapshot of the consulting services, and then move on to our sessions. So digital advisory, where we help into the digital benchmarking of the journeys, your platforms with the peers, We help into building the digital strategy and the roadmap, helping the banks and the NBFCs in designing their entire the digital journeys across all the product, be it on the deposits, be it on the lending, managing the programs for the AD technology transformation, whether you are migrating from one organization to another organizations, or within that any upgrade is taking place, that we help into the manage the entire programs. And then open banking, lots of the things that we do into building that entire open banking framework, onboarding process, the fintech onboarding, building the API strategy, all sort of the services for the banks and business fintechs. Lots of the work that we do with the fintechs and startup, again, from the business model development to the go-to-market, providing the tech services support. We do lots of work in the security and the compliance services, be it on the regulatory compliance check that you want to look into that, you want to have the cost optimization, technology architecture review, that's all kind of the work. And we do lots of the content research. So guys, now let's get started to our sessions, on which is primarily we give you the kind of some brief that about this master direction there, which is for the technology governance, that what it is. As I was talking about earlier, the first one, that avatar of this circular was the Gopal Krishnan committee report, which came in 2000 and 174-page document. That was purely designed only for the banks. It was only applicable to the bank. But this draft guidelines, which is there, so similar frameworks for, as very similar to the Gopal Krishnan committee, there were a couple of frameworks which were there for the NBFCs. And there was some conditional applicability for the NBFCs, as well as for the urban cooperative banks also. There was some avatar of that Gopal Krishnan committee was there. But now what RBI is trying to do, that having a one universal framework to manage the entire technologies, from governance to the projects to the management, security, and everything, right? And now this circular is applicable to not only the banks, but it also get extended to the payments bank, small finance bank, in the financial institution like National Housing Board, NABARD, NBFCs, across all the top, upper, and middle layer, which we know that 2 years back, RBI came with a categorization structure for the NBFCs. And also it applies to the credit information companies, that all the bureaus that will be applicable under these guidelines. So why this master circular as coming as a unified structure, right? So as I was talking about, there were multiple similar kind of guidelines were there for various entities like banks, NBFCs, and also there were multiple guidelines on the technology management, something on the risk management, something on the security. RBI is trying to bring in a single reference point for all sort of the guidelines related to how do you manage that information technology within your organization. And since the technology adoption, the digital adoption is continuing to increase, the banks are getting heavily dependent on the technologies, the customer impacts are directly linked to the technology services. Banks, RBI is very cognizant that technology management should be as per the specific guidelines, right? So single reference point, unification of all the governance structure for the REs. So primarily they are trying to see that the way RBI, every entity like the bank manages the technology governance on the management, NBFC should have the similar kind of structure. The payment banks, small finance, everybody should have the similar kind of a framework. Like it should not be differ from the banks to NBFCs and all these things. So that's very critical that they are looking into that. And definitely the heavy emphasis on the building the information and cyber security, because we know that because of the digital increase and this, all the services beginning to deliver, the security, cyber security risk is also getting increased, right? Now, one of the important factors that you need to keep in the mind, that the RBI guidelines for the cyber security for the banks continue to exist, which came in 2016. So you will have to refer both the circulars, this one as well as the one which is there in the cyber security, and as well as the third one, which is there, the outsourcing of the IT technology services, which came in the last months, right? And if you want to get into details, you can refer to our the YouTube channel where that we have taken the session on the similar outsourcing of technology services. So this was the primary board objective. If you try to break it down, so it's primarily the master directions is there in the draft version. Applicable date is that as soon as the master direction comes as a proper circular, let's say for example it comes in the June, then within the 6 months it is expected to adhere to that, because that's why it's almost like now 8 months, which is there as a draft already in place, right? And typically we have seen that what is there in the draft, normally it comes into more or less the same structure, right? So banks, NBFCs, SFBs, and everybody has the structure in place. They should start working on that directions, right? Banks mostly they will have that most of the aspects, most of the elements in place because of their requirement to adhere to the Gopal Krishnan committee report. but at least the other entities will have to strongly focus on that. Properly divided into the different domains, which we look into that subsequent slide. So if you look at that entire, the structure has been divided into the 7 chapters. One is the first one, the preliminary, which is specifying the timelines. Second is very critical, that governance is structured, that how the entire the tech governance should be managed, where that how the org is structured, the term of references, the roles and responsibilities should be managed for the managing the entire the governance. Third critical component, again, that how do you manage the entire infrastructure, especially the capacity management, the change management, how do you manage the services for the internal customers as well as external customers delivered through the technology. And that's where that also the component that where dependency on the third party is there, that's also you need to take care of it. The risk is very important to the technologies. In fact, I was reading one of the interview of one of the senior so I'll talk about like MD of one of the bank, and somebody was asking that, what do you think that the major risk that you foresee in the next coming couple of years, right? He's going to be CEO of one of the PSUs, which were there in the economic time. He said that he sees the technology risk as the one of the major risks, because the dependency of the technology to provide the services to customers 24/7. And if in case anything goes wrong in the technology, it will have the massive repercussion on the business performance, right? So risk management is again very critical. Information security, the data theft, data breaches is always a topmost risk. Very strongly that RBI is specifying to you to as a bank to focus on the risk and information security. The business continuity is again, it's directly linked to the risk management, where that how do you ensure the continuity of the services, because your entire dependency is high on the technology, like core banking or let's say mobile banking or the UPI. We want to use in the 24/7, right? And that's where that entire your continuity of these services through this platform should be there, right? And the last, not the least, but that probably they are specifying to the internal audit team that how the audit management should happen, right, for the entire technology. So this is like a control layer on top of the things what you are building that as a part of the this governance structure. And the last also they have given a guidance that what are the circulars because of this draft guidelines will be repealed, means that they will no longer be in the existence, and what are the things that you need to practice separately. So let's look at the first one, which is again at the foundation of the entire IT management as a IT governance structure. You need to have a very strong oversight framework that what are happening, what are the projects, what are the technologies that you are deploying within the organization, within the bank, SABs, or any of the regulated entities. There has to be a proper accountability, right? So if in case anything goes down and there is a customer service impact, there has to be clear accountability to that issues, right? Or if any projects has been rolled out, there is a clear guideline that, okay, who is owning that project, what the business impact that is in foresee. So complete accountability, and how do you going to manage that entire the risk. So risk identification will happen as a part of the chapter 4, while the entire oversight of the risk management has to be laid down in this structure, right? And it's very strongly recommending that entire governance has to be driven through the IT strategy or the technology strategy that you can call it, which digital strategy will also be a part of the technology strategy. From the RBI perspective, you may not be able to segregate the digital strategy and the tech strategy separately. You will have to consider both as a single framework, right? As well as a very strong IT policy has to be there, and it has to be approved by the board, and it has to be as a part of the regular reviews process also. What are the critical elements that need to be taken care as a part of this whole process is making sure that there is a pure strategic alignment with the business, right? Today's, if you look at it, the technology and the business, there is a very thin line of the demarcation. In fact, the demarcation has also gone. It's the business is the tech, especially when it comes to the banking, right? So there has to be very strong tech strategic alignment, and it has to reflect in your governance document. The project management, because at any given time today, most of the banks, NBFCs, since because of the so much of focus on the digital, multiple projects are running in parallel. So how do you manage the entire the projects? Either you are upgrading, either you're replacing, either you're building on the new capabilities, everything's right. So you need to have a very strong project management structure. The value delivery. So what are the technology deployment happen? What are the new services get added? There has to be a clear value alignment. The risk management framework, the resourcing, that how you need to ensure that you adequately resources, you are adequately staffed with the right skill set, and the entire the performance management and the focus on the business continuity. So these are the critical elements that you need to focus. There has to be clear board level of the oversight to looking into all these elements. So you need to make sure that you have the board agenda is very clearly defined where the entire technology aspects being taken care of it. All the elements like project briefing, that your risk briefings, your business continuity briefings, everything is being updated to the board at the regular intervals, and board also continuously giving you the guidance, right? Or the inputs on the across all the elements. How is there the IT governance structure within that you need to put in place across the, so bank mostly have this structure because I've been worked in the banks, and because of the governance IT qualification committee, banks has already been there, but it is applies to NBFCs, the small finance bank, and everybody that need to follow. So where the board level, that IT strategy committee is that identified body which primarily drive that entire oversight management. They provide the IT policy approval, the IT strategy. They need to evaluate that entire the risk and materiality of any of the initiative which we can lay down, any of the technology deployment happen, any procurement being carried out. They need to have a very clear idea about the risk associated with it and what are the mitigation measures is there. Setting up the entire administrative framework, how do you administrate the entire whole technology delivery within the organization? They need to put the frameworks. While board has more on the oversight, the education level where that day-to-day overseeing that has to happen, it has to happen by IT steering committee. Typically, MD has to chair this IT steering committee with the representatives from all the business heads. So what they are supposed to do, they are supposed to put up the entire IT policies, the procedure, need to put up the entire risk assessment and management. They need to have the strong project review mechanism. So all the projects status, within the delay, the timelines, everything has to be looked into that, the reasons, providing the advocate support also, and helping them. Mostly important is the prioritization. So this IT steering committee, one of the critical aspects of the governance that they need to take care is about the prioritization of the digital projects or the technology projects, right? Looking into the business plans for providing the support for through the technology to the business plan. And definitely also continue to look at the outsourcing all the arrangements, right? And what are the risk elements that they need to look at minimum? What are the security risks? What are the cost risks? What are the static risks are there? Like in case of certain things like digitally is not happen, what kind of impact it may have? What are the challenges that banks may face from the competitions, right? And the last not the least, but the CIO and the CTO has that entire responsibility of delivering that IT governance at the ground level, right? Working with the entire the tech team or the digital team that has to be taken care of, right? So they need to manage the entire repository of all the projects, all the risk elements, continue to report to the senior management, have a very strong oversight, continue to look at the capacity building, because one of the critical component of the entire circular is to figure it out the capacity. And I tell you, it could be the reason because we are, in the past we have seen that some of this incident which has happened, which primarily demonstrated about the capacity constraint at the banks and the back end, because of which led to the some stoppages of the customer service delivery through the digital channels, right? So that's where the IT governance emphasis is there. So before I go to the next, I'll just take a pause. If there are any questions, I would happy to pick it up, or if any questions are there, I will happy to take it up. Okay, if not, then I'll continue and then again we'll come back. And as I said, you can put your question in the Q&A sections also, which I will time to time will keep on picking it up. Okay, so next important chapter is on the IT infrastructure and service management. We know that entire your IT infrastructure, be it on your data center, your entire the server stack, you talk about it, or you're talking about entire the branch network, branch infrastructure, or your corporate infrastructure, right? Which includes the desktop laptops at minimal, and then entire that network infrastructure and the server architecture, right? And also the cloud involving the same, right? Because now it get extended because you will be moving some of your core infrastructure to the cloud. So how do you going to take care of the clouds? So you need to look this as guidelines as well as the outsourcing IT services in conjunction when you start looking to managing the IT infrastructure at the cloud, right? So so one of the critical IT service management, because as we know that as a bank or NBFCs or any regulated entities, they rely heavily onto the service provider, be it on the facility management services, be it on the network management, be it on the security operations centers, be it on the data center management, ATM switch management, like yes, so much of the dependencies of the service provider. So we need to have the very strong mechanism, and also is that from the third party, but as an entity, tech entity, you are responsible to providing that various services, tech services to your respective stakeholders internally, right? Be it on the application development, be it on the project delivery, be it on the providing the desktop support and all these things. So you will be supported by the third party, but ultimately you are responsible to deliver those services. How you are managing that IT services? So you need to provide the operational resilience, like there is a continuous continuity, right? Be it on the in terms of the resources, be it on the infrastructure capabilities. You need to have that. You can't say that, okay, suddenly the printer services is not available at the branches because of the printers are not working or the resources are not. It can't be the scenarios as simple as that. Or it could be like EOD or the BODs of the core banking services can't be performed because the team is not available, or there are some technology challenges are being faced. So there's like some of the examples are there. You need to have the internal service level agreement, SLAs, KPIs to be defined, regularly reviewing the annual maintenance contract, doing the proper vendor risk management. And again, wherever the third party comes and wherever that you feel that either it's an on-site or it's the off-site or it is an outsourcing kind of the nature, you need to work in conjunction with the outsourcing of the IT services. So both the circular has to be relatively looked at together, right? The very strongly on the project management, as I was talking about, the banks or all the regulated entities, because of the digital adoption and digital emphasis, right? Working heavily on the digital projects or the technology projects and continuous evolution in the tech space, right? Banks have been always in continuous process of the deployment of multiple projects. So depending on the size of the banks, at any given time, I've seen banks or the NBFCs running at least 50 to 200, 300 projects at any given time, right? Now, how do you manage these technologies? How do you ensure that the new technologies are being adopted or, or the revamp of the existing architecture that need to be carried out? All the projects has to be looked at from the business strategy perspective, look at that what it's aligned to your risk profile, and always there has to be completely reported to IT strategy committee. Like say, for example, you're doing any kind of the migration project. Migration project will always have a high risk element, especially it comes to the core application, be it on the core banking system, be it on your internet banking system and all these things. Because if it doesn't migrate on the time or during the migration, if some unwanted situation arises because it can lead to the various service disruption, how do you going to take care of? What are the risks that it will have? You need to make sure that you go and report it to the board and have a concurrence to that, right? Say, for example, when we are in the bank and when we're doing that data center migration, right? We went and told the banks that, okay, could be scenario that when we move to the new data center, we up this in services, it could be possible that some of the elements, some of the component may not come up, right? Because you're doing the heavy lifting of the entire moving the data center from one place to the other data center, right? It could always be the scenario. So we looked at it and also we provided a mechanism like, okay, you need to take care of the DR arrangements at that time. So like in case in the Monday, if you are supposed to go live with the new data center, something doesn't work, and these are the risks are there, customer service impact can happen, then you need to go back to DR, right? So all the projects, what are the significant impact can happen, what are the risks can happen, go and update to the management. So that's one of the critical expectations gonna be there. And there are a lot more controls are there. These are some of the snapshot. And the prioritization is again very critical, because as I was talking like 50 to 200 to 300 projects, you will always have a limited bandwidth with respect to resources, with respect to your third party partner supporting you, right? So you need to have always prioritization, and it has to be linked to the business strategy. A very strong emphasis has been put in the capacity management. Again, I'll say that because of some of the incident which has happened in the past, and always there is a chances of, because of the lack of the capacity or the scale, because we don't know at times that how the technology will fast track your transaction, fast track your business performance, right? Like, say, for example, UPI came, right? Within the 2 to 3 years, banks started facing the massive impact on your core banking system because of the continuous transaction hit, right? From 1 million transactions to the multi-million transaction and billion transaction in like 3 months, 3 years, the time frame. It's not an easy, right? Because all the transactions ultimately go and hit the core banking system, and across not only the core banking system, but entire layer chain, right? From firewall to router to your databases, everywhere the transaction impact will be there. So how do you go and check your capacity? You need to have a very strong anticipation mechanism that, okay, what are the new things that you're going to put in place? Like, for example, now the banks are also getting heavy into the banks and fintech partnership. Now the fintech is going to acquire the customer, fintech is going to initiate the transaction. What kind of impact that fintech will bring on your infrastructure, right? What kind of the volume that he will generate? So all the anticipation has to be there, and go back and look into that. What are the capacity that we need to build on the whole process, right? So capacity management is strong, and not only from the server side of it, but applications, your databases, your router, firewall, your network link capacity, as well as resources, right? So everything has to be looked at it. And then not last not the least, but change management, because any technology's implementation, digital transformation has a heavy impact on the change, be it on your business processes, be it the customer service delivery, everywhere that impact is there. So you need to be very careful, define that entire change management process, right? And some of the guidelines related to data migration, because you will continue to keep on migrating from one infrastructure to another infrastructure, one application to another applications. You need to be taking care of the data migration requirement, like maintaining the copy of the previous one, the new ones, making sure that there are proper reconciliation, the reconciliation of the records of the older database and the new database, and all some of this thing. And then some guidelines on the outsourcing of IT services. But here again, I keep on emphasizing that whenever you're looking at the outsourcing of the IT services and managing the control level, go and refer that IT governance guidelines, which has been released by the RBI last year. And we are providing just a bit on the sales. So that's where that we are working with some of the REs on helping do the understanding the compliance structure with respect to outsourcing of technology services, as well as this master guidelines. So as I was talking about that, risk is becoming a very critical element to the entire technology management, that because it's a part of the operational risk, right? And it's become one of the key risks within the organizations, apart from your financial or the market risk or the credit risk, it straight sits in parallel to that, or maybe in the higher to that, right? Because one impact of the any service delivery, one impact of the any technology disruptions can have a massive repercussions. Like, say, for example, if your loan management system or the loan origination system is down in the during that month end, many of REs you are there in the business, you can imagine that what kind of impact it can have on the loan booking systems, right? So risk and information security is very critical. So you need to have that very strong IT frameworks where how do you define the risk, right? So typically the framework which we all know that, and which many of you might be following, is the RCSA, right? Risk control self-assessment. So you need to define your risk control self-assessment structure. What are the risk elements that you will identify? What are the inputs that you will use for defining the risk, right? Maybe your internal audit reports, maybe your different statutory audit, different incident which happened to your organization, different capacity reports. So you need to figure it out. What are the elements that you will use to derive the risk? Okay, and how do you going to manage the risk? What are the impact that you will have for the risk? What are the mitigation measures? How do you close those mitigation measures? So entire the risk management framework has to be defined. Key operational risk indicators, right? CORI, that some of the terms that we use for the managing the risk, like risk matrices. You need to have that various risk in matrices to be very clearly defined. The data collection process for those risk matrices also has to be defined. So be it on the system performance, incident, change management, recovery, RTO, RPO, these are the different terms are there. So you need to look at it. And then very strongly, you need to have the information security policy and cyber security policies. And for this, you need to look at the master guidelines, which is there, this one, as well as the go back, and you need to look at that master guidelines for the cyber security for the banks, which was released in 2016. So need to have a very strong policies and the entire security management framework, right? From the identification of security risk to doing the policy implementations, the maintenance, security awareness, and everything, and not only from the process perspective, but the technology risk management, be it on from antivirus, from firewall, from the phishing, and all the kind of the attacks that you need to be there. You need to have the proper security management structure. And typically, RBI expect that, okay, you should have the ISO 27001, the framework, which probably provides a good handy framework to continuously manage the security much better, right? Because it has that surveillance audit structure, right? So what are the controls that you have implemented? You need to make sure that you are maintaining it properly. There is a monitoring mechanism, and every 1 year or 6 months, somebody will come and check that whether those controls that you have defined is working pretty well, right? And very clearly getting detailed into the managing the CISO's roles and responsibilities, and then emphasis on the privacy and access controls. So with this, again, I'll take a pause. We are almost mid of the sessions, but I'll see that if any questions are there. Okay. Yeah, Prashant.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yeah, Prashant, please go ahead with the question.
Yeah, good afternoon. And Mr. Shashank, very nice session. You have till now. We are very well with the session and the content as well. So, one question on the risk management. So, could you please brief in a short how for a video KYC application, okay, in the bank, where how can we define the risk control metrics?
Okay, so let's look at that. I'll try to bit general, like some example, video KYC you're talking about, but it could be for any technologies, right? So you need to start looking into the different dimensions, like, okay, what kind of so we start with the vendor, like which vendor is there, what kind of the support that vendor will be providing. Then also what are the kind of the impact that it may have on the process, like video KYC. Video KYC is a critical part of your entire saving account journey. So what disruption that video KYC can bring into the services? So risk related to the disruption of services, the data related risk, right? So you need to start looking the different dimensions, right? And that's where that you will start figuring out, okay, these are the risk elements that you need to identify. Then you will be doing that various kind of the reviews for the video KYC. Like maybe you do the security reviews, security audit. Then some elements will throw up the security audits. Then the contractual, so contractual issues can be there, like support provided by that partners is there. So different dimensions, when you start looking that, it will start giving you a guidance that, okay, these are the risk element could be there. So any technology projects that you look at, any new technology deployment that you look at, start looking into the different dimensions, from the onboarding to the delivery management to the sustenance. So that will give you an idea in the short that if I try to define. Yeah, Kunal.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Shekhar. It was really nice talking with you,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
it's going great. I have a question related to the IT infrastructure.
Yes.
Yes, so as the initial stage, we are working on the NBFCs. So we just wanna know ki what we have to take care at the initial stage to build the IT structure. Right. So what are the certification, what we have to take care? So this kind of the information and what we have to take care the compliance side as well. I just want to know. So this kind of the things basically.
Okay, so Kunal, so just give you a broader understanding. So since if you are starting up, right, say for example, early stage, then always it's a good starting point happen with the proper architecture being in place, right? Once you start setting up the architecture, because architecture requirement is also very clearly defined into the guidelines, right? So have an architecture, and what are the application stack that you will have, what kind of the future capacity that you need to with that. Like, so you start putting the business strategy, business goals, business planning for the next 3 years and all these things. And then you start building your entire the tech stacks, which will also include that infrastructure. So that's when it will help you do the sizing and all those things, right? And this topic itself is will be in a 1 hour session in itself. But would be happy to connect the offline, right? So that's a part of it, like business study, business goal, business plans, you pick it up, then you look at your architecture, look at the tech stack that you want to build it, and then you plan for the sizing, plan for the infrastructure. Because I've seen many times, like, I think, Kunal, maybe you can just mute your from your side, because lots of the sun. Yeah, thanks. So that's why you start helping, because many times, as I was talking, that companies I have seen having ended up buying on the bulky infrastructure component, be it on the firewall or maybe it on any component, because which is not aligned with the business strategy, business goals, right? So it may be unnecessary expenditure also, or it may be under expenditure also, because you might have undercut entire business plan, and suddenly you will realize that within 2 years you will have to start upgrading. So that's where that you start with the business study, business plans, roadmap, volumes, everything, and then build that. There is no proper compliance certification structure is there, that okay, once you set up the infrastructure and get somebody to certify, I don't think there is a such certification may require, right? yes, for the compliance, it's always good that once you have put it the entire policies, framework and everything, you may engage with a third party, which can come and who are experienced into that space. They can come and look into your entire stack, technology stack, infrastructure, the risk management process and everything with respect to guidelines, and can guide you that whether you are completely in align with the expectation of the guidelines or there are deviation where that they can help you. So that's why I'll say is that you can engage with any third party to help you, because that brings you the outside view, right? Because you might have think that, okay, I've looked at all the guidelines and I have implemented everything. But before RBI comes and hit you with an audit, it's always good to get in a third party views, right? Most of the banks has always been doing that. As a good practice, ISO 27000 is always in a good starting point. So at the early stage, since you are starting, it may not require, but at least 2 years or 3 years down the line, it's always good practice to go for the certification.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe we can connect offline to get you on a more guidance, Kunal. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Sure. Thank you.
So guys, the team has already put in the feedback form, and it's enough because we continue to have always a practice that who provides the feedback, we share this deck with also. So please share your feedback, and it's also helpful for us to keep on improving our sessions, right? Your feedback is always a good guidance factor for us to continue to evolve, right? Okay, so maybe I'll just continue for one couple of more chapter, and Ashish then come back with questions, right? So let me just continue with another chapter, and then we'll come back and pick up your question. Okay, so we spoke about the chapter 4. The chapter 5, business continuity disaster recovery management. As I told you, again, it's come from the past experience, right? So a couple of factors of what have happened in the industry, like always RBI respond to the certain evolution which is happening in the industry, be it on the negatives, some incident would happen, or the way market or the technology is evolving. So address managing the balance between that. And we have seen some of the incident where some of the digital services have been disrupted for quite longer period, right? And we know that, and most of the bank, we keep on knowing within the banks, like if in case any server goes down, any application goes down, we always have a disruption of services. So emphasizing very heavily on the proper having the business continuity plan, that in case of the situation, and I think COVID has given a good guidance that how to have a very strong business continuity plan, that even like resources can't move to the offices, how can you continue to operate the technology services, right? Because technology is the only means to deliver the services during that period, right? Because of the branches not working, people are not coming to the offices, right? So having a strong business continuity plan help you to be ready for that kind of the adverse scenarios, and supported with the entire technology's disaster recovery management. So one is from the procedural aspect, from the resourcing aspect, from the business perspective, that your continuity plan well supported with a disaster recovery plan for each of the technology element, be it on your data center, be it on your core banking system, be it on your service infrastructure, be it on your third-party partner supporting into that, like ATM switch provider and all these things. Having a right disaster recovery plan, because having a strong DR plan only can complement your business continuity, right? So that's need to be there. You need to have a very clear clarity of having the RTO, like recovery time objective of recovery point objective. Now, this is not a session where I can go deeper into that. Maybe we'll plan a separate session on the detail on the proper business continuity disaster management, right? But having a right RTO and RPO through a proper business impact assessment is very critical to the whole of the process, right? You can't just go and abruptly define that, okay, my core banking system, 15 minutes of RTO will be there. For my mobile banking, 30 minutes of RTO will be. It has to be well supported with the business impact assessment. Like, say, for example, in case this mobile banking goes down, okay, I will have a, like, say, for example, on the certain financial impact because of the certain services I'm not able to sell for the 15 minutes or 30 minutes. So you need to have the proper business impact assessment. And not only having the proper disaster recovery plan, but also having a strong mechanism to continue to keep on testing it from your DR drills or the business continuity plan, right? And always a very strong expectation on that how you do the DR drills, right? Regularly doing the DR drill for each of the applications separately, or doing in a proper integrated DR drills, like bringing that entire data center down and try to run that your entire business operation from the alternate DR side, right? So that's actually give you a lots of confidence. So not only from the RBI perspective, but lots of the confidence to the management. Yes, what are the infrastructure investment has been done in the DR? is bearing the fruits that in case the downtime happens, that the data center bank can continue to run or NBFC can continue to run. So having a strong business continuity plan, well supported by DR, is again very critical expectation of these guidelines, right? And this is primarily for the audit team, as we know that banks or any regulated entities need to have a very strong internal audit framework. And within the internal audit, there has to be a proper IS audit framework, which continue to have an independent third-party internal views on what are the technologies team is performing, right? How the technology is being managed, how the technology risk. So all the other chapters that you have been seeing from 1 to 5 has to be taken care by the core technology teams from under the CTO and the CIO guidance. While this is primarily being done by the internal audit teams as an independent, right? As an independent, because the entire audit team's reporting goes to the audit committee of the board, right? So to bring that entire independence, so provided the complete guidelines as a the audit committee of the board, which primarily oversees that entire the function of the IS audit. They need to have a very strong audit policies, which continuously get approved by the audit committee board. You need to have the proper calendar that like what are kind of the audits that will be performed. So it could be your digital channels, it could be your alternate ATMs kind of infrastructure, it could be your server infrastructure, it could be your data center infrastructure. Every dimensions of the technology management should be get covered as a part of that. And they may also be, get a third parties support to get the external expertise to do the audit also, right? And very important, the technology team needs to continuously keep on closing the audit. So as a typical organization structure, we would have seen always the conflict between the audit teams and the tech teams, right? Because both are like, one is a supervisory structure and other is more like operational structure, right? So audit is a very critical component. So these are the 4-5 dimensions, 5 domains were very clearly documented. Gopal Krishnan, we had the outsourcing of IT services as a separate chapter, which has been removed, because it has now been brought as a separate regulation itself for the outsourcing of IT services. Apart from that, RBI has come out very clearly that these are some of the regulations which they have removed it as a part of these circulars. Like you no longer these policies are applicable. Like earlier they had a separate circular information system audit, right? But now it's a part of this master circular. So similarly, there was a guidelines of business continuity disaster recovery plan, right? So you need to follow that separate circular. But now you don't need to look at that, but you need to primarily adhere to this master circular. But apart from this, which has been repealed, 2 multi circulars have been always been as a part of, as an extension to this master directions that you need to follow, which is on the outsourcing of IT services, which already released last month. Okay, and we have also started our practices service to provide you the compliance and the recap assessment with respect to guidelines. So anybody who wants to reach out to us, we are happy to support you. And also the guidelines of the cyber security, which was there already since 2016, you need to continue to follow that. So what impact does it bring on that? So these are the guidelines, right? But I think from the impact perspective, if you look at it, as I was talking about, the banks may not see a major impact per se. Yes, they may need to put up again refresh compliance structure, compliance demonstration when the RBI, when the circular goes live, comes in existence. And then within 6 months, when the RBI comes for audit, they will try to look at the fresh that how you're complying with this new structure, right? But may not have much a challenge, but I think major impact gonna be there on those CICs and the NBFCs, because they may not have the kind of the structure in place. So you need from the putting that entire the IT governance to the project management, to the entire the change management, capacity management planning, to the proper risk assessment management framework of the risk identification, to the building that audit structure, the BCP and the DR plan. They will need to do everything as a fresh, right? And the similar impact maybe on the payment bank and SMEs, but since they have been come in existence, they have been trying to adhere to some of the guidelines which is already there for the banks, right? But I think this will bring under the direct supervision structure of the RBI with respect to technology management as a part of this guidelines. So banks will have to show the demonstration evidence is proper to adhere to these guidelines, right? And since you banks or fintechs are doing lots of the technology partnership, lots of the controls will spill over to the fintechs, right? So as part of the cybersecurity, as part of the entire the risk management, everything that you will to start looking at the part of the partnership structure also. And when through the partnership angle, that when you're trying to check it into that, then you should also consider in parallel the outsourcing of IT services as well as outsourcing of the financial services. And definitely the huge emphasis will be looked at from the security and the privacy. So these are like impacts that you will foresee, but I think it's all from the positive perspective, because to now the kind of the dependency that we see on the entire the technologies is pretty high, right? So again, I'll come back to the questions. Yeah. So Harish, the question is, can you share the presentation? Yes, we'll share the presentation. Providing we just need your support to fill up the feedback form, because based on the feedback form, those things, share that presentation. Yes, Ashish, you had a questions. So can you just go ahead? Team, can you unmute Ashish? Yeah, Ashish, your mic has been no permission has not been given yet.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ashish, we can hear you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for such a nice presentation. These guidelines are still at the draft stage,
Yes.
right? And if I take the um, a correlation between the master direction related to outsourcing of information technology services, which are now the final master direction, and the draft master direction, which were released in
Yes.
November last year. So there's significant change over here, and um, mm, as a responsible person within the organization, when we have to create policies, create the systems and procedures, and implement those things, uh, m- making a decision on the basis of draft. Um, uh, Becomes very difficult, because in practical aspects all those things will have to be get gotten approved from the board, buy certain tools, buy certain systems, customize those systems, or maybe customize in a manner that those reports are generated, whereas the final one may have a very different flavor of what it was written in the draft one. So my suggestion over here is, of course, we take the input from experts like you guys, who uh, who support so many organizations. So just was trying to figure it out. What do we do at this stage when the master directions are at the draft stage?
So Ashish, a very well point taken up. But if you look at it in the outsourcing also, there's a lot more clarity was brought into. But the broader the control structure, if you look at it between the draft and the final, the master circular came for the outsourcing, you not find much of the difference. Like, for example, governance structure, the policy structure, BCP structure, like you will not see a major of the difference, right? And the same goes with the most of the master draft which comes from the RBI. And I'm not saying that you can go and do the compliance structures, build the compliance, but at least the work can be started, right? For example, here the governance structure or IT policy or the building the risk management framework. I don't think there is going to be a major change to that. Let's say, for example, the way they are asking you to build that risk management framework, fundamentally can't there be any difference, right? So you are ready for it. So as soon as the guidelines comes, because if you look at the timelines which has been given, that as soon as the guidelines get released, there will be a 6 month of window for the compliance. So if you start at that time, but putting that entire the policy structure, entire the control framework may not be feasible. So always as even a practice advice that you may start working, you may not go to the board, right? Because you will put that risk framework, you put the policy development, you put that entire the capacity management structure, the BCP structure. But as the final draft comes, you can do a quick check if in case there are an enhancement to be done, which I have very 90% chances that you may not have that, only the 10% of the delta variation that you may have to bring into the table. And that was also very specific. So it's always a good practice to start working on the draft, at least at the broader structure level, the control structure level. A specific can be picked up. Like, for example, outsourcing. From the draft to the final, they bring lots of the clarity in that what is applicable and what is not applicable, right? But outsourcing policies structure has not changed, right? Entire the due diligence structure has not changed. So that's why I'm just trying to give a reference.
See, that is very correct, and obviously we all get focus when the final thing comes up,
Yeah,
and
definitely. Yeah, like you're not worried till the time because it's not a
no, it
circular,
is
right?
not about being worried. See, you must understand, or you must appreciate the bandwidth with each organization would have. Right.
No, Ashish, I
The
can
bandwidth, so
say
whenever these master directions come, you start taking up the additional piece of work, right? You may have other various activities going on within the organization, or maybe the IT department is all maybe doing some certain other things. Let's say customization work for the risk management platform, or maybe for the
no,
loan
Ashish, I
management. So
fully agree with
those
you.
things are already
Yeah.
there. So
No,
whenever these draft things come, it actually saps your bandwidth.
no, I fully agree, Ashish. I fully agree because I've been in the tech, right? As I was telling you, almost 8 years I was there managing governance as well in the technologies, and these circulars keeps on coming. It's always it's very challenging of the managing the tech delivery as well as the managing the compliance requirement, managing the governance. It's not easy, but you will have to find out a balance between that, right? So that's what my point is there, right? It's always challenge. I've been there, run the technology and management, and facing the RBI audits or the internal audits is not easy. So a couple of slides, I'll just try to finish it because almost we are coming to the end, and we'll continue to have a request that please share your feedback because feedback is pretty helpful for us, right? And also we'll share the presentation. So just quick, the last, primarily the goals that you want trying to achieve as a part of the putting the proper compliance structure, that you will have the compliance structure in place, having a strong policy in the risk management framework, understanding the gaps will help you at least, and then putting the governance right. We are very much into that space where because the expertise of working in the banks, managing those compliance requirements, managing running the technologies, managing those various audits, bringing those experience into the play. So we are working with the banks and NBFCs to either helping to the understanding the proper as is and what are the gaps are there, building the proper compliance review structure across all the domains, and building the entire the control frameworks, right? And control frameworks can move from the building that entire policy structure, that org structure, the governance structure, security policy, vendor policy, cyber security policy, or entire building that entire the risk management frameworks, like how to identify, how to do the assessment, mitigation plan, and like every aspect and continuous monitoring of it, right? And building the entire the monitoring and review structure from the service management to the project reviews, project monitoring, from the development, third party, every aspect, that how do you define, how do you set the KPIs, how to collect the data for those KPIs. So everything will be there. And also helping into the performing the proper business impact assessment, BCPTR. So these are the control frameworks that you need to put in place. And that's where that we also help the organization building those frameworks, right? So with this, I almost come to an end, and I'll pick up the questions. So this is like next training program that we are coming, and if you are interested, then you guys can go and I think that share your feedback, and the team will reach out to you. So with this, I'll take a pause and then go ahead with the questions. I think so. We have Ganesh. Before that, we had earlier one question, but maybe team can just.
Hi, Shashank, can you hear me?
Hi, Ganesh. Hi.
How are you?
Good to see you. Yeah. Hi. Thanks.
Yeah, always good to hear you. Okay. So Prasad, Shashank, the basic query, basically we are talking about IT governance and all. Just sharing, very recently I had an interaction with a new financing company being set up in Gift City. And they are thinking to launch, their product, their loan issuance in an Excel and eventually graduate to a systems. What would be a view of a regulator looking at, like a NBFC type structure where they are not having proper, because when you talk about IT governance, there are so many risks involved.
Yeah.
So how do you, from a regulator point of view, how do you view this type of companies, setting up with no proper systems in place? How will the regulator view it?
So, okay, so there, as I was saying, like say, for example, if it's the NBFCs, whether it's since it may not have, it doesn't have that too many infrastructure, maybe it may be falling into the small NBFC category, right? If it's a small NBFC, right now, at least this circular doesn't bring under the, bringing a small NBFC under the umbrella, right? As you rightly said, they may not have the much of the technology stack itself, right? It may not have the direct applicability. Wherever like some procedural requirement that need to be adhered, you can look into that. But the broader technologies may not apply to that. And that's where they excluded the small NBFCs also as a part of this circular as far as concerned.
Okay. I find it little odd that in the current age of fintech, where everybody's trying to go the fintech way, people
Yeah.
at the launch, they,
No, but many as a fintech also start at the manual way. Some of the guys may start manually filling in
Mhm.
forms and all these things. So, but there's some other element of the data risk and all these things. It's always good practice to
Yeah, yeah.
and even if you have physical document you are collecting, there will
Mm.
be a Xerox copy of Aadhaar, there will be a Xerox copy of the PAN number. How do you maintaining those data security in the physical form,
Absolutely,
or maybe putting in
absolutely,
the Excel file? You need to have some basic practices from the RBI.
exactly.
Nothing will apply, but as a best practices, you should always look at it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I was concerned about data security by mistake, accidental data deletion, record deletion, wrong interest calculation. There's so many, open questions which were there in my mind.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Anyway, thanks for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Kanak Prabha is asking question, how is the confidentiality and segregation of data maintained in a multi-tenancy cloud structure? So I think it's very important, these questions from the current point of view, where that banks are started opening up to cloud adoptions, right? Banks have started moving some of the workloads on the cloud, be it on the loan management system or the loan origination system or the CRM on various Cs, right? Very clearly, the guidelines have been expired in the outsourcing of IT services, from the cloud control perspective. But these points, especially when you're talking about the confidential segregation, I think you need to have a very strong contract structure with the cloud service provider, be it on the AWS and all these things. And also, specifically, when you're working with directly with the application provider, right? Let's say, for example, any LOS that you're looking and you're working with any LOS provider who may be consuming that cloud service provider services for the hosting for the SaaS, right? So there you need to figure it out that how the multi-tenancy structure is being created. There is a separate database structure. Try to get deeper into the architecture understanding, and then also try to look from the from the agreement perspective. So, but most of these guys try to take care of the proper segregation of the data structure, separate database itself. You need to also figure out whether they are maintaining the same database but different schemas for the customer. Those are the things that you need to go and check it out. But refer to the cloud adoption guidelines, which is there as the outsourcing of IT services, provide lots of the clear control that you need to take care of it. So any question, guys? Again, it's a sincere request. Please share your feedback. It's always helpful for the feedback. Once you share the feedback, we'll immediately get back to you with the presentation also for your easy reference. And anybody who wants to have a detailed discussion, you may also always reach out to the team for the detailed discussion on this, either this topic or the outsourcing of technology services. So if no, I think, so we come to the end of the session. Thank you for your time. Thank you for patiently listening to us. So thank you, and looking forward for our engagement continue forward. Keep on looking at our LinkedIn connects or from our newsletter for continuous update on our upcoming webinars or the knowledge sessions. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody. Thank you very much.